All right, hey everyone, welcome to the first part of this series. So in this series, we have Matt here with us today, and basically this is first of a five-part series where we're going to be looking at the fundamentals and the approach to property investing from a data-oriented perspective. So how you can use data to best identify where to invest in and what that process of analyzing data is, right? Moving away from just a at a very basic level, looking at one or two things and being like, supply is low, demand is high, therefore there's a good area to invest in, to having a higher order of thinking in terms of the narrative you're creating around demand and supply and why an area is good to invest in. For the first episode in this series, we'll be starting with WA. From there, we'll be looking at each of the other states. I'll drop the links to the other states in the chat shortly for you guys to register for that one if you haven't already. But let's, before we jump into any of that, let's do a quick intro. So hi, I think some of you guys might know me. I'm Arshad Zaki, director at Zaki Property. We're a buyer's agency. I'm also the head of sourcing at Zaki Property. We specialize in finding really good assets, good off markets, just good opportunities for our clients, as well as other BAs that we're partnered with. Matt, do you want to do a quick intro? Tell everyone a little bit about yourself. Yeah,
Yeah, sure. So Matt or Matija Jolic, I'm a co-founder of HTAG. We've been live for about 5 or 6 years. Essentially, it's like a data platform to assist investors on how to make best possible decision using data and metrics and a collection of metrics. In my previous life, I worked for large construction and development organizations, and I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I guess data analysis has been my forte for a while. I guess moving from academia all the way down to, or sort of up towards now, owning a data analytics company.
Beautiful, beautiful. I've got to ask Matt. I know most of the employees at HTAG, their Facebook profile is the black and white, quite serious looking image. What was the inspiration behind that? I think it's very cool.
That's an AI generated. So I think we were in a rush to just put something there and with a background, because you know how everyone has like either a purple background or some kind of a pink background behind their head, essentially. So we just done this one quickly. I need to change it anyway. I think it's sort of close enough when I look at it, but I think I do look a bit younger there. So I think it's suited for an update. I mean, it was just an accident. There was no, I guess, intent behind it, I would say.
No, I quite like it because I think Alex has like a similar one as well. It's quite cool. I think I need to do something similar. This image I've been using it for a while. I think I need something a little bit more.
Yeah, but your one's more natural. Your one's more natural. Our one is more. You should see Alex on other, like, let's say on other messaging apps. He's got like one with a big beard as well, and it gets you can get quite creative with the AI to see how you're going to look. You know.
There you go.
Options.
One of those aging AI generators, those TikTok filters. Anyway, if we start talking about that, we'll be here for too long. There's not an AI chat, there's a property data chat. Okay, beautiful. Again, thanks, Matt. And I know everyone who's dialing in and who are going to be listening to the rest of the series are really thankful that you're sharing these insights with us. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. Just a very quick structure for today's event. So this is what the event structure is going to be looking like. We're initially going to start off with more fundamental stuff before jumping into specific areas. The fundamentals are going to be, how to look at thinking about creating a strategy of the areas that you want to invest in, some of the fundamentals of data analysis, just as a whole, as well as using HTAG specifically. We'll give a little bit of context around the Perth market as a whole, and then we'll jump into a few of the specific areas. We'll finish off with maybe just an overall synopsis of the Perth market and what we can learn from it over the last 4 years in terms of where we need to go next and what type of areas to buy in. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A where you guys can share suburbs in the chat that you want us to look at, and yeah, then we can analyze those live on the go, get Matt's thoughts on that. Matt, is there anything I'm missing that you wanted to cover that's not here?
No, that's pretty much it. I think the last bit about analyzing suburbs, we have to be streamlined about that because I know there's usually a snowballing effect there. And we can be here for hours, maybe sending a request of some sort. Because it does take a bit of time to analyze the suburbs. So maybe just, we need to track that, but everything else seems perfectly aligned. I guess it's a good story there.
Oh
We're
yeah, no,
covering
don't let it
everything.
run too long. I think if I work past 10:30, the missus is she's got like a 10:30 rule that if I hit
Yeah,
10:31, I'm in for a bit of trouble. So I think we'll aim to cut it off on time for sure.
yeah,
Don't want to be getting in trouble. Okay, beautiful. Let's actually jump into a quick poll. Let me hopefully make this poll live. I haven't used polls in a while. All right, cool. I just launched a poll. What are three factors you look at when deciding where to invest? Would love to see some of your answers. If you can't see the poll, you can just drop it in the chat. Yeah, let me know if you can see the poll. I think it should be live for
coming up. It's coming up for me as well.
beautiful. All
I
right.
was about to enter the answer, and I'm like, no, just leave it for later.
For me, it's like, where's all the hype? Okay, cool. We're getting some answers. Cool. Keen to see what people are saying around that. Beautiful. Quite a few answers. Picking up speed. Ooh. I love an interactive webinar. Like some people they just do a webinar and they're just like talking.
Yeah, see, that's my problem, man. I like how you did this because, like, when I start, and which is why I always said, try to direct me because when I start talking about something, I just completely forget that I'm speaking to, and because I can't see anyone, I can't read the body language,
Yeah.
and you just keep on talking and talking and talking. This is much better. I really like this.
Beautiful. All right, we'll give it one more minute before I click end poll. We're at around 30 answers, so that's beautiful. Love to see. A lot of people that we have here are sophisticated investors themselves, a lot of buyers agents here. So I'm hoping to see some really impressive answers, some answers that I'm gonna be like, whoa, I didn't even think about that. That's news to me. So yeah, I'm keen to see what people are saying. All right, give it 30 seconds or so more. If I end the poll before your answer is completed, I'm sorry, please don't hate me. But have to end it. Cool. I'm gonna do a quick countdown. 10, 9, 8. Give it 5 more seconds. Had the poll live for around 2 minutes now. Beautiful. All right, I'm gonna click end. Anybody getting in their final answers, please do that now. And the poll is ended. All right, let's view details and I will share these results with everyone as well. So let's see. Oh, there we go. We can see some of the, maybe I will not screen share that just yet because people might not be comfortable with their email addresses being out there. So let's look at some of the answers. We have data, confidence, affordability. Actually, Matt, I'm going to email this to you as well. Data
Yeah,
confidence and affordability, socioeconomic index, infrastructure spend, building approvals, days on market, renters versus owner occupied, yield, capital growth, cash flow, diverse economy, a lot of similar answers, affordability, one says location. Love that. Market risk. That seems to be another one that's popping up quite often. Vacancy rates. I'm actually surprised that only one person has mentioned vacancy rates. I feel like that's a pretty big factor as well. There's another one. Percentage of investors in the market, listing supply, past growth, desirability during shit times. I like that. That's a good take. Sales growth, location, demand, supply, infrastructure. So it seems like quite a few of the standard stuff that we see, which is always good to hear. I will share these results with everyone to have a look. Matt, what are your thoughts on some of the answers that we're getting over here? I'll DM you the
yeah, no. So can you just pull back the actual question? Sorry, I just want
yeah. So the
the
question
actual
itself
screen for
is,
the question.
what are three factors you look at when deciding where to invest? Which obviously is a little bit
Yeah, no, I mean, the answers are great, but I think what's been missed by most is that they first have to figure out why they're investing. So they completely forgot about their goal and the reason behind the initial purchase. So that's why maybe the question wasn't, we didn't look at the semantic aspect of questions and actually try to be as accurate as we can. But the first thing that you do is you develop a brief or a strategy, which is the reason behind you actually making a purchase. And once you have that sorted out, then that informs all of these other metrics that people have mentioned. And by informs, I mean the weightings you assign to all of those metrics in order to realize the goals that you've sort of predetermined at the onset. So the strategy is the first thing that you have to work on and develop before investing. So that's the first thing that you work on. Everything else that was mentioned is correct, but it's referring to the actual area.
Beautiful. Okay, I think that's a good transition into the next slide that we have over here, where you want to talk about how to go about creating, a personalized strategy, right? So this is something that people hear a lot about. It's just like, oh, have a strategy. And I feel like this word is kind of thrown around, like just like it's thrown around a lot in this property investment space, but it's not often actually looked at in depth, right? So what is the process for an individual to create a strategy, as well as, or a buyer's agent to help their client create a strategy? What does that process look like to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, first, I'd like to say that all of the answers that were given are correct, and didn't try to discount the answers. They're correct, and they all play, I guess, different importance in different circumstances. But coming back to strategy, now, strategy can be a very complex concept, okay? And there are people who are much smarter than me out there who actually, bend their minds on how to work out a strategy. You can simplify the strategy to a couple of points, but essentially think about it in these terms. You want to have, so first think about, and I guess there's a mindset aspect to it as well. So why are we in property investing? So we're usually in property investing to allow some kind of freedom down the track. And that can come in many different shapes and forms. But let's say hypothetically, we assume that we want to have a certain amount of positive cash flow at the end of 10, 15 or 20 years that will essentially substitute for our lifestyle so we can actually let go, have a plan B and not work anymore. So that's our end goal. So strategy would actually be deconstructing that end goal to the initial purchase, and then it will be taking into account your existing financial circumstances, i.e. how much you're earning and how much, I guess, you're saving, and if you have any other properties and cash flow, and putting that all together to actually realize which is the first purchase that you need to make in order to realize that goal. Now, because you're working with different time frames, and because you're working with, I guess, shifting qualities such as interest rates, even CPI and your salary, these things actually move, and they can alter your goal, and they can actually expand your investment time horizon or shorten it. But what I usually say at HTAG to people is just to make them think about the initial purchase. And I say, you need to think about what your budget is, because that's common sense. But budget is very important because it actually informs what you can buy. And by informing what you can buy, it also tells you, I guess, the possibilities of that growth. You can't have your cake and eat it too. This is what I always say. So budget is the first thing. The second thing is the investment time horizon. That means, do I want to be invested in this market for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? That's very important to understand, because then you approach cycles in a bit of a different manner. And I guess this will relate back to our discussion about Perth. The third thing that I always say, and it sort of relates to the second thing, is I ask people, do you want a hotspot or a warm spot? That's a terminology, but essentially what that stipulates is, when do you want to see your first exorbitant growth? Now, we have seen from Perth areas that exorbitant growth is anywhere between 10 to 25 or 30% annually. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, anything above 10% annually, because 10% annually after 7 years, you've essentially doubled your asset value. So anything above 10% is essentially a hotspot territory. So when do I actually want to see these 10% returns or above 10% returns? in order to generate that equity so I can leverage into additional purchases. And this is why I force them to think in terms of a hotspot and a warm spot. A hotspot would be an area that's generating immediate returns, 10% and above, and a warm spot would be an area that will take X amount of years in order to get there. And now there are positives and negatives in relation to both, which is why I ask a simple question, but then you deconstruct that question further and see what the flow and effect is when it comes to answering those questions. And then finally, of course, which is what a lot of people, which is what I don't hear discussed a lot, but actually a few of the answers mentioned now, which I'm very glad, is the actual risk profile. And risk profile is very important. And now we can define risk in many different ways. You know what I mean? You can define, lending risk, macroeconomic risk. But essentially how I see risk is anything that actually stops me from realizing my end goal, or anything that stops me from buying an asset in an area which will perform in the way I want it to perform. So that will be risk. So whether it's cash flow or capital growth that I'm after, hypothetically, risk would be anything that will impair generating of cash flow, if that's a strategy, or generating that equity or capital growth long-term for the duration of our hold or investment time horizon. So see now how you have a couple of moving parts and they all need to relate to each other into a coherent story, which will then inform your research.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think like one of the things as well that I'd like to add is having a look at this through the perspective of a multiple property portfolio. Because again, like a lot of the people here, they're not just looking to make that one purchase, right? They're looking to make like multiple purchases, right? Or they're looking to help their client make multiple purchases. And then it's like, what is the different strategy with different purchases, and how do those strategies connect to each other to kind of create the overall narrative of that individual's portfolio over the long term. But yeah, that's
absolutely. And you can reduce it to pragmatics and specific. Let's be specific. So you're buying an asset now, okay, but in order to get to a certain goal, you need to leverage into additional purchase in X amount of years, which sort of infirms that your asset needs to have about 7% compounded growth annually. I'm just giving an example. But it also needs to have a cash flow component, because you either need to save, or you either need to have a high salary, or the cash flow itself needs to have a cash flow component, or all of it combined as well, in order for you to extract that equity and make another purchase. So you can reduce it back to the required growth and cash flow to inform how many purchases you need and how long it will take you to get there. Now, as I said, because we live in a dynamic environment, these things will shift, and you need to allow for some contingency factor, I guess, and this is what banks do. I mean, I guess when they assess loans, and some of the mortgage brokers that are here as well know this better, they assume, let's say, a 7% interest rates for you to see whether you'll be able to make the repayments in order to actually allow you to lend you the money, in combination of a multitude of other factors. So they make a certain assumption, and you do the same.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, let's move on from that. Let's talk about, and I think like this is where a lot of the answers hit on the head pretty well. What are some of the fundamentals of data analysis and area selection from your perspective? Again, we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. I know this is something we'll probably be here for a 6-month course, going over each of them and talking about it in depth. But at a base level, what are some of the core ways of approaching this?
Okay, the first thing that has to be maintained is the relationship between your brief and how you actually look at data.
Actually, Matt, I might stop here, stop screen sharing here, and get you to start screen sharing. So now I think it would be a good time. Enter into the HTAG portal, and as you start talking,
I mean, okay. So stop screen sharing so I can actually do it. Give me a second. Which one will I do? Let's start with this one, because I'll first want to talk about it theoretically, and then I'll mention other things. So you see, this is like my account dashboard. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that you first need to have a defined strategy, which includes budget, timeframe, risk, hotspot, and warm spot. And then that informs how you analyze and structure data. But at the core of any data analysis would be an understanding that a reducing supply and an increasing demand leads to growth. So that's one thing, okay, which is pretty standard and must be understood. Okay, the second thing is understanding of timeframes and timelines. So nothing grows perpetually, and you need to understand or have some kind of an idea when a market is actually coming off its peak, when it's at the bottom, when you can actually leverage the market momentum towards realizing your goals. And the final thing is being able to understand how a collection of metrics, whether it's 5, 10, or 15, actually tells or speaks a coherent story. And this might seem a bit abstract, but I'll give you an example. So if you have an area, and I'll just give a very simple example. If you have an area that has phenomenally increasing unaffordability, okay, for its internal residents. Now, compounder growth is an amalgam between internal demand and external demand. I'm not talking about supply side now, so I'm not going to get into that. But essentially, in order to see 10% plus growth in an area, you need to have both demand from internal residents, whether it's owner occupiers and investors, as well as external investors coming to the area, which is when you see 10 people fighting for the same home. But in order for that to happen, first and foremost, the area needs to be affordable for its residents. So if the area is unaffordable for its residents, we're hitting a friction point where one domain of demand is actually going to drop off and will not allow us to actually experience that exorbitant growth. Now, what did I just do here? I explained one simple data set in terms of situated behavior on the ground. So coming back to the final answer is connecting the metrics in a particular way so you can construct a narrative that reflects purchasing behavior on the ground within that suburb.
Beautiful. Okay. That makes really good sense. We have a couple of questions here, one from Vikas and from Peter over here as well. So I think you touched on this already. I would like the warm spot clarified. Which side of the bottom, which side of the hot/boom market is that sitting? Warm on the way up to boom, or warm as the boom has passed and now it's getting cooler? That's a question we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's actually a good question, and the answer is both. But the answer is both, but it's not both as well. So now the answer has to be given in response to what your goal is, and your goal is to actually leverage the market momentum in the most complete possible way and to experience as much growth as you can. So if we look at it in those terms, in terms of your goal, then a warm spot would be an area that has a particular arrangement of metrics where within the next 2 years, it will become a hotspot and you'll be able to leverage the entire market momentum. Now, in some circles, this is referred to as predicting demand movements, et cetera, et cetera. So then after the area comes back from its peak, it's actually not a warm spot anymore. It's actually going into cold, because what usually might happen is that it either reverts back to the mean, and reverting back to the mean, usually to experience more growth in the warm spot. Give you an example. A reversion back to the mean could be 2% annually, while a warm spot returns 5% annually. But it can even go further down and go into the negative growth zone. So when it comes off its peak, it can actually go into the negative growth zones. It's not actually a warm spot. It's even a cold spot or a freezing spot. So to answer your question, we need to think about the goal, and the goal is to extrapolate or extract as much growth as we can from the market, which means that we need to interpret where the market will move next. We need to enter that market before the competition actually starts congregating within that area. That will be a warm spot. Wait for another year and a half or 2 years, and then leverage the entire full growth cycle.
Beautiful. I think one of the questions from me, Matt, and I think this is something that quite a few other BAs, other property investors would have experienced, is it's quite easy to identify a hotspot and be confident about it, right? It's like honestly, even if you're not looking at data, you're just like, where's everyone going, right? And you can pick that up. How can people have confidence that an area actually is a warm spot and be like 100% certain that this area is going to pick up, right? So and I guess that's some stuff that we'll look at later on, but what are some of the ways that people can identify that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very easy in the same way that you identify a hotspot. But you know, the in order to identify anything, you need to know what you're looking at. So you have a coherent understanding what a hotspot is, and what's a hotspot, Arshad?
That's a good question.
Give me some of the hallmarks of a hotspot.
Hallmarks of a hotspot, I mean, it's like very, very competitive, prices rising very fast. Days on market is very low, properties are going ASAP. Stock on market is very low. It's just like supply is very low. But from a BA perspective, probably a lot of the properties are just getting sold in the first couple of days that they're on market, maybe even pre-market. So yeah, I guess those are some of
Yeah, so spot on. So hallmarks of a hotspot is a completely reducing supply and a phenomenally increasing demand. Remember what I said, price growth equals reducing supply, increasing demand. And then to sprinkle the cherry on top, you can look at the past annual growth. And if you see 10, 15, 20, 30, while you see a nosedive in all of the supply metrics and a nosedive in all of the demand metrics, by the way, when I say a nosedive in days on market means that the demand is increasing, yeah? You already know you're in a hotspot. So those are the hallmarks of a hotspot. And then furthermore, hallmarks are those that you can't actually find real estate, you're overpaying for an asset, it becomes very hard to enter, etc., etc., etc. Now, it works the same with a warm spot. And what is a warm spot? A warm spot is a suburb that has a restricted supply where even small increases, but restricted in such a way that even small increases in demand lead to price growth. So for example, if you have stock on market, inventory, building approvals, and you need to look at the supply in a temporal terms. And when I say temporal, I mean you need to look at it as a timeline. So for example, stock on market is a current representation of supply. Inventory is a month-to-month representation of supply. It's like an average stock on market on an annual base. So you're already actually looking at the past in that instance. Building approval is future supply of new property. And then hold periods is potentially future supply of existing property. So for example, if hold periods is 6 years, that means the property within that area is retained by its residents for 6 years and then disposed thereafter. So what I've done there is I've considered multiple dimensions of supply in order to make sure that I don't get tricked and any parts of this supply, whether current or in future, come to the market where they stifle price growth. Now, coming back to your question, a warm spot is an area that has in every temporal domain, it has a reduction in supply, okay? Preferably, so first, it's very affordable for its residents internally. So it needs to be affordable for its residents internally because every price growth begins predominantly with the owner-occupied demand. And when you ask the mortgage brokers, 2 times more mortgages are actually signed to owner-occupiers as opposed to investors. So the momentum of that growth is going to begin with internal demand, owner-occupied demand, some investor. So it needs to be affordable. It needs to have a dramatically reducing supply in all domains of time, whether it's future, now, or past. Yeah. And potentially, if you want to look at it in a perfect sense, it needs to have a nosediving vacancy rate. Why a nosediving vacancy rate? Because a nosediving vacancy rate contributes to an increase in rents. And what you usually see in a warm spot is when you look at the past growth, you see an area generating about 0 to plus 5% growth in typical values, while its rents are increasing by 15% annually in the last 2 years. So what usually happens is when rents reach a level where ownership becomes more sensible to renting, the nosedive in the vacancy rate usually shifts to the reduction in the days on market. Now, it is a difference entering a warm spot that is affordable, has a reducing supply, and a days on market trend, which is going up, which means that demand is weakening further and further. And the slope of the demand curve actually indicates to us whether even this reduction in supply will matter. We want a tight market. We want a market that supply is reduced, demand is increasing. So to find a warm spot, you need to find an area that has a reducing vacancy rate, but also flat or semi-reducing days on market long-term. And when it comes to property, trend equals direction. And when you combine all of these into a story, you are guaranteeing, depending on the slope of the days on market, you can actually predict whether an area is going to become a hotspot within a year, year and a half, or 2 years. But these other prior things must be satisfied. affordability, reducing supply, and potentially nosediving vacancy rates.
Beautiful. That's a really good summary. That's a really good summary. Okay. We've got one other really good question over here, which we'll look at before we jump into the areas. I think that's the main thing that majority of people came here today for the areas that we're going to be discussing and some of the data around those areas. But before we do that, we'll tackle this question, which is quite a specific question from Raj, actually a pretty good question. So he says, it's here in the chat if you want to have a look at it. He says, regarding internal demand, why would an existing resident worry about affording current prices when they are already in at the old price and doesn't have to pay the new price? Wouldn't they want to see further growth of their PPOR in case they needed to sell? Does that make sense?
I'm hoping they're having kids, and I'm hoping those kids are having kids as well. The answer is the population of that area is never going to remain static.
Yeah.
So what she's inferring is that the population of that area will always remain the same, so people retain their property. I'm talking about new owner-occupier buyers, or people who actually have 3 people living in a house and 2 are moving out to buy their own house because it's now affordable and they can. I'm talking about dynamics of society and how it moves. Now, people will not sell to actually buy the property again. Who usually buys is other owner-occupiers, either from the same house or coming from elsewhere. I'm talking about internal demand from within the suburbs. So usually population movements and the fact that I was 10 years ago and I'm 25 and I can afford a property, but that actually goes, it's not from one snapshot to another, it's an accumulated thing that goes through time. So there's always more people actually wanting to buy and move out because the population is growing. The population is growing on the Australia level, but it's also growing on the suburb level. So demand is essentially the growth in the population, the growth in the need for property, but it doesn't have to be growth in population. It can also come in a form of, there's 4 people living in a house and I just want to move out. I'm earning enough.
How would you counter someone who said something like, even if maybe there's an area where supply is trending down, demand is trending up, but affordability is really bad, right? And that the person's argument with that particular area is that this area is unaffordable for the residents there, but there's a high desirability for people outside of this area that are going to be moving into this area that can afford it, right? For whatever reason, maybe it used to be a poorer area, but it's coastal, and now a lot of people are like, hey, this is some nice coastal real estate, and they're richer and they want to move there. That's just like a broader question. How would you?
Yeah. So I usually get a question that's similar, and that question actually means trying to develop a hypothetical case and create a rule out of it. A rule that can be applied in every different circumstance. Now, property investment is a game of probability. It's a game of increasing the probability of a particular outcome. As I said, if you want to see exorbitant growth, you want to increase the probability by having affordable real estate for internal residents, which will cause a positive feedback loop, which in financial theory, it's called reflexivity, and it will invite external investors to actually compound into growth. Now, do you have areas that are desirable even though they're still unaffordable? You do. Stratfield, you do Byron Bay, you do many other things, you know what I mean? But tell me this, in the last 10 briefs that you received, how many of them can you please, Arshad, buy me a property for 1.2 mil?
Not many, unfortunately.
Yeah. So even the briefs that the briefs that you receive are telling you that the affordability is becoming one of the most crucial factors in Australia for property growth, because it needs to be essentially a necessity to get a compounding effect of many demands. I always say a cupcake. I produce cupcakes and I have only one cupcake left and there are 10 people competing for it. I'm able to raise my prices. Now, you have some blue chip areas where property growth is based on some other different factors, but then what is the volume of investors in that area? Will you be investing in that area? And is that outlier something that you can create a rule out of?
Beautiful. That's a great answer. Okay. Thanks for that, Araj. I hope that answered your question. Doesn't look like we have any other.
Coming just back to the owner occupier. So essentially what the question is, we have to assume, will there be owner occupier demand in the future anyway? And then the next question is, how does owner occupier demand emerge? The answer is yes, there's always owner occupier demand, you know? So what Raj was saying is that why would a person within a, say, suburb sell their real estate and buy another one where they can just sit in their own house? But that's inadvertently assuming that the owner-occupier demand ceases. There's always owner-occupier demand within a suburb from a multitude of reasons. And I don't want to use the term demographics because it's such a term thrown out there for no correlation to, or specific correlation to growth. But essentially, it could be increases in population, it could be downsizing, it could be many other reasons why, you know, there's suddenly more owner-occupied demand within a suburb. It doesn't have to be that same individual person that sells and buys another one, is what I'm saying.
Beautiful. Okay, let's jump into areas. So I think we're gonna go in the order of budget, mid-market. Oh, actually, before areas, we want to
start Perth.
Yes, Perth as a whole, and then we'll jump into specific areas. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess now, Matt, I'll let you just get into giving a bit of context around Perth, and like how we should probably approach the Perth market from your perspective, the Perth market overall, and then we'll jump into specific suburbs at the different budget ranges.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I'd like to say, I think for years now, there's been, I guess, an understanding that I'm against Perth, and I guess this is a good forum for me to actually. I mean, I've stated my people who actually got to know me a while now understand what I've been saying, but in any market that I invest in, I always consider timeframes. You know, I really despise, or despise is the wrong term. I really dislike when people say Area A is a great investment location without explaining for who. Which time horizon, what is the risk profile, because a hotspot for me is not a hotspot for you. So when I speak about areas, I always speak in terms of timeframes and their possibility to realize certain gains within a particular time frame. And also hindsight is a beautiful thing. Like if you're a particular long-term investor, you're looking at different indicators. If you're a short-term investor, you're looking at different indicators. So painting the same market with one brush is something that I'm really against. But I guess in this world and age of clickbait, you're always forced to mention an area or say something about an area, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess as a final note, every market is a great investment opportunity, but we need to make sure why are we investing it and what's our time frame, okay? So I'll just talk about Perth for now. Again, Perth has many different sub-markets within Perth. Perth is not just one market. And the issue with aggregating data at the LGA level or at the state level is dangerous because it doesn't actually paint a picture when it comes to what really happens at the point of purchase. So we all make a point of, we all purchase at the suburb level or even at the street level. This is where we make the purchase. And when you aggregate data back from the point of purchase all the way up to state or city or LGA or whatever, what usually happens is that within that Hungarian goulash or mishmash, you're combining areas, some with very low volume, some with really high volume, some with outliers, some with no outliers. And you're trying to pair them all together to give a coherent picture about a particular market. And what can happen in some instances is that you can have, you know, a suburb that has 3 areas, let's say that has 7 areas out of 10 with very low volumes and data accuracy and 3 phenomenal areas. And those 7 that have very low volumes and data accuracy are pulling these 3, and at the LGA level, they look like an atrocious investment. So this is the dangerous bit. Now, we can talk about corrosion and how one affects the other later. Answer is no, but sort of yes and no. There's more to think about. But I guess what I wanted to say about a market is, you know, you always try to go to the level of purchase and try to analyze is in as much granular detail as you can. And try to avoid making calls about an area at a macro level. In saying this, let's just look at the Perth quickly. This is the Perth LGA page. We have many different suburbs in the LGA. I'm not going to go into the suburbs because we'll go into the suburbs later. What I'll look is, I'll just show you, for example, how I analyze a typical curve. And as I said before, everything on a page is a representation of behavior. Everything on a page is a representation of behavior. And what do we see on this page? We see a histogram at the back, which is indicative of the volume of sales. We also see a typical price curve, and we see a projection cone. Yeah, a projection cone sort of giving us a bit of an idea of, how much potentially prices will move in the next couple of years. Now, you can analyze literally everything on this graph. You can analyze the shape of the curve, the histogram as well, the relationship between the histogram and the shape of the curve in order to understand sentiment of the area. I'll give you an example. If you have a typical price curve that is extremely volatile, and by the way, analysis is always comparing one area to a multitude of others. Whether an area is a good investment or not, it's never inherent in the area alone. It's always based on comparing with other areas. So I don't have other typical price curve graphs to actually superimpose with now. I'm looking at this one, and we can see a lot of change in sentiment because the price goes up and then it goes down. It goes up and again, then it goes down. And when it comes to a medium or a typical price, usually what you see in suburbs is either a steady increase or a flat sort of steadiness, or there's more, because it's aggregated on the suburb level, there's less representation of a change in sentiment. And in this instance, we can see a bit of change in sentiment spanning from 2007 all the way to 2020. Essentially, we saw minimal growth and a bit of a decline. 2009, then an increase, a pump. 2010, a drop again, then an increase, then a steady decline all the way down to 2020, and then a hugely exorbitant growth. So we can see that Perth has had substantial growth in the last couple of years. Now, the question that I always ask the people, and by the way, this was a great play 3 years ago, but the question that I always ask for people if they want to take out some insights is, when you look at this typical price curve, the question always must remain, whether a perpetual hotspot does exist. And if it does exist, I would like to know a clear methodology about it. So the next thing that we can see, what is good about this graph, is that we can see both the increases in the typical price have actually been supported by the volume of sales at the back, because we can see the histogram, we can see an increase in sales here, which is then followed by an increase in price. There is a substantial volume of sales in Perth overall throughout, which is always good. What you don't like to see is, for example, a typical price increasing while a volume of sale is substantially dropping. I mean, that's unsound economics, because if there's less and less sales in the area and prices continue to rise, there's something happening in that area which is not, I guess, found or reflected in sound economics. It's either FOMO or some emotional decision making or something like that. In case of Perth, this is not happening. If I had to analyze this typical price curve, as I said, I would look at its behavior from 2007 to 2020. I will look at the shape of the curve. I will look at its relationship with the histogram at the back. Then obviously I will look at its past behavior in the last couple of years and decide whether it's a play for me or not. And again, I would superimpose that against other suburbs. This is for houses, by the way.
Sorry, Matt, I might jump in with a question over here. So I guess this is one that I've heard from quite a few people, BAs that are buying in Perth, and it's even something I've thought myself, investors looking at Perth right now in this moment in time. I guess one of the arguments they have is that, okay, Perth used to be quite volatile over the last 15, 20, 30 years, but that's because it didn't have a diversified economy and it wasn't as attractive of a city to live in, right? But now that the economy's become more diversified, a lot more people are moving here, there's aggressive population growth. Even though it's already grown a decent amount, there's still a lot left for it to grow to catch up to other capital cities, right? If someone posed that point to you, how would you respond? I've heard that point made quite a few times, and it's even something I've thought about.
So I've heard points, but I haven't seen supporting information. That's the first thing.
Yes.
I would need to look at the data to actually see whether the economies are becoming more diversified. The fact that there's more infrastructure investment in Perth doesn't mean that the economy is inadvertently diversified. So that's one thing. So I would need to look at that. I also try to minimize my decision-making on hypotheticals. So I note that past behavior is not indicative of future performance, but past is the only data point that we have to analyze in order to make a decision. So I try to think of a hypothetical scenario to make a decision upon that hypothetical. And what to me, it's a bit intellectually dishonest in that way, is that if I have something, information in front of me for about 30 years, and I'm actually ignoring that simply because I'm assuming that it will change in the next 30. So to me, that's intellectual dishonesty, or maybe dishonesty is the wrong term. Okay, it's if you're assuming, we need to look at everything on par. If you're assuming that something will happen in the future, the first thing is that I will need to look at that data in order to back it up and see. Okay, and then the second thing, if you're assessing the future, also you need to take into consideration the past, and in doing so, you need to assign weightings. Which one is more important for you? Now, you are doing your analysis, and that's fine. Me personally, I would never disregard the past, especially if the past spans back 3 or 4 decades. Okay, especially. Now, in order for Perth to catch up to other capital cities such as Sydney and Melbourne, for example, let's use Sydney as an example. There needs to be substantial economic and GDP changes both on the suburb, LGA, and state levels. And they might be happening. But you also need to think about psychology, and we'll get into affordability later. I'll tell you a story, and I always say this. As I always said, data is a representation of behavior. When I came to Australia in the year 2000, I was able to fill 2 shopping trolleys with $50 in 2000. I could afford it then, and I was filling 2 shopping trolleys. Now it takes me $300 to fill 2 shopping trolleys, even more. I can still afford those $300, but my life has been reshaped and impacted by the substantial increases in pricing. And by the way, this is 25 years that I'm talking about now. When residents within a particular city or town experience 60, 70, 80% growth in 3 years, you can bet your bottom dollar that there are psychological changes on the household level that are going to impact their purchasing patterns, even though they can afford it. And now the question mark is still whether they can afford it. By the way, that's still a question mark, and we'll get into that later. But even if they can afford it, there is a question mark. The second thing that I would like to say is, if we have a hypothetical about a particular town and understand that it's changing, and by the way, we can never assign a particular growth value to that. Whoever has told you that because of the changes in Perth, they're expecting 15% growth for the next 10 years, nobody wants to say that, because that would be, social media suicide. So they say it, but they never assign a particular value or return to that city. My question to them would be, why not find the Perth in 2021? Why am I bothering with a hypothetical, even though we might grow, which I think it will not, and I will think we will not because of simple physics. Something that goes up, down fast must come down. It doesn't have to come down as fast, but it must come down. Everything moves in cycles. Our thoughts, I love a burger today, tomorrow I'm going to get a wrap. Simple as that. You need to reduce everything to individual behavior and ask yourself, do some introspection and see how much permanence you got in your own life as opposed to a particular market. And then we'll layer on top of that affordability and everything else, So there's many discussions to be had here. To answer your question, I guess, in a more simplified manner would be, what they are doing is they're making a decision on the basis of the fact that they're assuming that one market has to catch up to another in the same way. And that assumption is the fundamental aspect of the decision-making. So that's essential. Sorry?
So it's kind of like, I think like the main thing I'm picking up over here is, instead of going down this method of using hypotheticals to inform the decision making,
read what's in front of you.
Yeah, which could be true, couldn't be, it's harder to predict, right? Like there's some element.
I might go get a coffee to Marcus tomorrow in 8 a.m., but I might not.
Yeah, and it's like, rather, instead of going down that direction, have like a framework that is like guaranteed, like, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. So this is the thing. Property is a game of probability.
Yeah.
Simple. Your job is to increase the probability of a particular outcome. And the further you go out into the future, the more uncertainty you are invoking by the nature of added additional time. Okay? So if you're adding on top of that a layer of uncertainty, and by the way, you have all the tools to make a decision now anyway, but the answers that I usually have is, when I say, and just for everyone to understand, economies and countries make decisions on the same basis as I'm explaining now. They look at the past, they look at the cycles, and they make decisions for the future. Hedge funds do the same. So everyone looks at the past cycles, how it behaves in the past, and looks at it in the future. Now, Perth will potentially grow. The matter is how long and at which point in cycle. So what might happen, it will go, then it will revert back. And then in the next cycle, it will grow more, and it will revert back, etc., etc., etc. Everyone based decision on the basis of past. As soon as you invoke arbitrary thinking, I had one answer in particular. I'm thinking about game theory. And by the way, I have a book here, Game Theory. Where is it? Here it is. Here it is. I love that theory. And the person who said it probably doesn't even understand what that means. But it's like we're trying to complicate things in an unnecessary way, is what I'm saying.
Okay, beautiful. I'm wary of time, so I think maybe we can jump into specific suburbs. Maybe if there's anything you want to say to tie off that. If not, we can jump into specific suburbs. Let's start off with you going through the process of how you're identifying these suburbs, and then let's look at a few lower budget suburbs, then a few mid-market suburbs, and then tie it off with a few high-end.
Yeah, no, so, and I know, as I said to you, Arshad, like I'm a talker, and sometimes it's required because our industry is at a particular point where some things need to change. And I'm not saying that I'm here the holder of the change, but banner or whatever, but it needs to be really simplified so people can make an accurate decision. And the simplification comes back to understanding, again, as I said, supply and demand, relationships between metrics, etc. And coming back to suburbs now. If you're making, I always say when I train buyers agents, I go through one-on-one, demo sessions, but also strategy sessions. And I always tell them, if you're making decisions on the basis of data and on the basis of metrics, you need to first understand your brief, but then you need to also understand which metrics relate to that brief. But you don't only need to understand it, you need to have the capacity to explain it to a 9-year-old. Because if the 9-year-old understands it, then you can explain it to your client, and the client will understand why they're getting that shortlist. Okay. So coming back to Perth, as I always do, the first thing that I do, I filter in confidence because I need to look at areas that have high confidence data. And as you said, we have a time limit, but essentially confidence in data refers back to long-term sale volumes. The more sale volumes you have, the more you can extrapolate data from those sales. And now, what happens if you invest in an area with medium and low data confidence is that what you might find is that the days on market or the stock on market shift dramatically from a month to month. And again, you're adding a layer of uncertainty into your decision making, which you don't need. Remember, it's a game of probability. So I always filter in confidence.
Go into that confidence apart from just the volume of sales, or is confidence defined purely by volume of sales?
Confidence, there's a few more things, and it's a statistical measure, but let's assume and answer it directly that the dominant part is the volume of sales. Because let me give you an example. If you have a sale now in a suburb for 500K, then in 3 months, another house sells for 850, what is the typical price in that area? Is it the average? Not really. You need volume, you need a scatter plot, in order to figure out what it actually is. So you need, in order to increase the significance of data, you need more data points.
Yeah. And this goes just back to that broader framework of doing anything we can to increase the probability of a positive outcome, right? There might be an area that's low confidence that would grow really well, but it's just harder to predict. So might as well go somewhere where the confidence is high.
But it's even inaccurate. For example, you might filter in, and this is the confidence column here. Let's say you have all the highs now. You can have medium or low. Then you go back, you see last year growth, low confidence area, you see 45%. And you go, wow, it's growing by 45. But maybe that 45 is inaccurate because you based it on 2 sales. And there's many more homes within that area. So it's not only the fact that it changes, but even the accuracy of data diminishes. Now, Game of probability, eliminating risk. Look at the high confidence data. The next thing that I do, and now again, this depends on time frame. You have to consider the time frame of being invested in a particular area. I always consider our RCS risk score. Now, this RCS risk score can be explained in another, essentially webinar, but just think about it as an insurance policy against any sudden macroeconomic changes that will adversely impact the town you're invested in. So the risk score usually refers to industry centralization, dominance of mining and agriculture, as well as negative environmental effects such as bushfire, erosion, etc. It looks at 75 other metrics such as socioeconomics, renter to owner ratio. However, because we're trying to extrapolate risk, the highest weighting is assigned to industry centralization, negative environmental effects. Now, I always say that this is an insurance policy, so having lower risk does not predict growth. So if you're invested in areas that have highly diversified industries, that doesn't mean that those areas will grow more than others. You need more for an area to grow. But what allows you to do is allows you to buy an insurance policy that should macroeconomic conditions change to impact that single industry, which is centralized in that town, such as coal. And let's say China is not buying coal anymore. You see people being let go. There's no more purchasing power. It adversely affects the price. Now, your investment time horizon can be 10 years, a decade. It doesn't mean that the macroeconomic conditions will change within that decade to adversely affect it, but you need to consider it nonetheless. In the same way you insure your car, but you don't actually drive out of the driveway every day hoping to have a car accident. Yeah? So it is an insurance policy, and that's always what I do. In this instance for Perth, what you will notice, as some of the people who are online who are our members, I always set it at greater to 50. RCS is a comparative score, so it compares every area to each other. So it's a relative score. When I set it greater than 50, I'm eliminating suburbs that are above average in risk, But in this instance, I set it to 65 simply because when you look in terms of industry centralization on a bigger scale, Perth has a more centralized industry than other states. I'm not talking about Darwin and Townsville. I'm saying Perth in general has more centralized industries, which is why its price curve is moving like this. Yeah. Has more, and not every town, you can't just jump on it now. Not every town in general, Perth has more centralized industries than Brisbane and Sydney, or WA than New South Wales, Queensland, and Adelaide, okay? Which is why I put it to 65, I usually put it to 50. And see how I'm constructing a narrative. I'm explaining every metric to you. I'm explaining it to my 9-year-old daughter next to me. It needs to make sense, and it needs to refer back to your brief. So if your brief was coming to me and saying, I'm low to moderate risk, I would make sure that the risk score has to be above 50. And I would make sure, if you're saying I'm high risk, then my data accuracy could be medium. Then my risk score could be potentially above 30. It all changes on the basis of the brief. Now, affordability index is another important metric that I filter in, and this has been developed by HTAG. It takes into account median incomes of the suburb, the typical price, current interest rates plus a 2% markup, and we allocate 50% of median household income to mortgage repayments. So what we're doing there, we're setting the scene for the warm spot or the hotspot down the track. We want the area to be affordable for its residents. So if you have a restricted supply, it will cause reflexivity and therefore price growth. I do these coaching sessions literally in 3 hours as buyer's agent. So that's why I'm sort of cutting short. If there's any questions later that I can answer regarding affordability and a particular hierarchy, I'm doing it in a particular hierarchy for a reason. We can chat about it and you can ask me questions if I haven't explained something well. What you see after that, I restricted the supply. I restricted the temporal aspect of supply. I restricted the stock on market percentage, which is current. It's also relational because it relates to dwellings. I restricted the inventory, which is months of supply, average months of supply. So it has a bit of a past effect to it. I restricted the building approval ratio. I said less than 1.5%. I want to minimize the future supply in the next 2 years when our warm spot is going to turn into a hotspot. Because if we have a lot of building approvals now, and it takes 2 years for building approvals to materialize into a dwelling, you have an influx of supply in the next 2 years when it's supposed to turn into a hotspot, and you see dampened price growth. We don't want that. We want our hotspot. We want to make sure that our hotspot happens. And the next thing, I'll look at hold periods. And see, this is another issue or semi-issue that I see with Perth. In Perth, you usually, on average, have lower hold periods than other states. If I had to throw out figures there, you would see Melbourne sitting at around 8 or 9 years, Perth sitting around 6 or 7, Queensland also sitting at 8 or 9. Now you have suburbs that are 13, suburbs that are 3, but essentially hold periods a bit lower in WA. For what reason? We're not going to get into that, but they are. And the reason why hold periods are important, again, it refers back to our brief. What is our investment time horizon? So if a customer comes to me and says, listen, I want to invest in a suburb and I want to be invested for 7 years, then I need to make sure that the hold periods are greater than 7 years, because I don't want existing dwellings or seller from existing dwellings to enter the market right at the point where I want to sell, which is going to dampen price growth, or any time before that. Now, hold periods is also a diversified metric in a sense that it also signals livability. So if you have suburbs or in suburbs where people hold on to property for a really long time, they hold on to it for a reason. And sometimes knowing what is actually sufficient. You don't have to know the why. But anything above a single cycle, whether it's 7 or 10 years, is always phenomenal. And see what I've done here. I've constructed a narrative and I've gone through a process of eliminating risk. And I received, now, by the way, you saw I didn't put in price point, I didn't put in yield. So this is for any price point, 10 areas, or any yield, etc. You know, at this point now, we said, you know, what is low cap? Low cap will be anything below 550. I always cast a wider net, let's say, and you put 600 and then you buy below typical value. The issue is, for example, let's say you come a brief and you know they want a warm spot, i.e. they want to materialize a lot of growth within the next 1.5 years, and they say, but I only got 400 to spend and I want to invest in Perth. By you understanding how to structure this narrative, you can explain to your client and say, well, it's not possible, Mr. Client, but this is what's possible, you know? But anyway, let me put 550. I don't think I'm going to get any results, which is interesting. But what I'll do is I'll enable the bedroom filter and see if something comes up. Nothing is actually coming up, so I'll increase it to 600. Now, a lot of people are asking, surely there are properties within Perth that are 550 in value. Well, yes, but the 550 needs to coincide with this brief, what we've listed. Do you understand? It needs to coincide with the brief or with the algorithm and the values that we've associated, which refers back to the brief. Of course, there are areas that are 550 in value in Perth, but my question is, do they have risk addressed? Do they have data accuracy addressed? Do they have affordability addressed? And do they have a tight supply? So I'll start with 650. Let's start with 600. I don't know why it's not. Yeah, so we've got 3 areas. These are the, I guess, I think, Arshad, you said you want bottom, medium, and high, yeah?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Would you like me to go into the suburbs now and explain why?
Yeah, let's pick. Maybe we won't do all 3. Maybe pick 1 or 2.
Let's do swan view. Swan view.
Yeah, I think we should have time for all 3. I think people are more interested in budget and mid-market buys. So if we don't have time to talk about,
yeah, so these are the suburb pages. What I'll do, I'll expand all the metrics. So now this is where the narrative construction comes into play. This is what you need to know, and you need to construct the narrative.
I actually had a question before we jump into the specific suburb. So just if you could switch back to like the page where you were on the filter. Yeah, so over here, right? So cool, all of these metrics make sense. I think like one of the things you touched on earlier when you were talking about strategy is the not just identifying like the metrics and where they fall into, but also like the trends across time, right? So it's like, how can we like effectively identify those trends across time using our filtering process? What does that look like?
So yeah, so what I've said here, and this is a very important, I guess, point. So trend analysis is the most important analysis in data analysis. At the moment, what we are setting here are just values. We're not setting trends. Yeah. Trends takes into account, the RCS score takes into account trend, because RCS score is a forward-looking metric, takes into account 80 metrics that we have on our platform, including all of the trends, but also short-term trends and mid-term trends. So what I do is I first restrict the current values. And let's say, just in this instance, because we have 600K, let's say if I had it to 800K, 800K. I would need to open up every single, sorry, I have it to, let's do all. Yeah, I would need to open up then every single suburb page and go into trend analysis. Now, your question is, can you have the trends even here? Yes, it's coming out in the next data release, most probably. So you'll be able to actually set, when I say trends, let's say you'll be able to set the slope. You need to understand the slope of the overall supply. You can set it. For now, I use and people use the RCS score, because RCS score, arshad, takes into account its overall trend as well as the recent trend. So we'll come back to it, but what do we see here? We see an overall trend reducing as well as the recent trend in the last 6 months reducing. And the algorithm takes into account that for all of the 80 metrics on our platform, it produces a score, which is this bar here on the right-hand side for a particular domain. So you can do that by either inserting the RCS here, take account of trends. You know what I mean? I personally don't do it. I personally set the values and make the values restricted to follow my strategy and my methodology for a warm spot. Then I go into an analysis on the suburb pages to take a look at trends. We are only maybe 45% of the way in order to come really to a particular suburb. So I don't know whether your listeners want to see the full methodology or they just want to talk about a few suburbs. I don't know what value they'll get more.
That's a good question. I think methodology is more important in terms of us understanding, but like methodology in application to a specific and then
so look, when you look at suburb pages, each and every information, not only is it a data point, so that's an oxymoron, but I mean, it's a representation of behavior that you need to assess and try to analyze what it represents on the ground when it comes to purchasing property and your goal, i.e. growth. So the suburb pages is sort of arranged in a particular way, specifically because you need to analyze it in a particular reason. So when you go all the way down, if your strategy is, for example, short term, then what you need to look at is the affordability index. When you're looking at the affordability index, you're not only looking at 34.9 years to own, it has crossed actually the 30 threshold, which is going into the unaffordable territory. You also need to look at the forceful increase in the unaffordability. And what we can see from this, because it's correlated to medium incomes, we can see that there's been really minimal increase in the actual incomes in the suburbs because it wasn't able to actually tilt and make the growth in the affordability index flat. It was just increasing dramatically. But the suburb growth was outpacing income growth, you know? So what I'm trying to say is that you don't only look at the value, you actually analyze the trend. And what do we see in this suburb? And this is when I say analysis. Analysis is complex and it takes into account a lot of factors, but we have a simplified method. I'll show that at the end. But from this little graph, we can construct an enormous story that you can write down on 2 pages. So first and foremost, what do we see? We see that in 2022, in April, it was 19.1 years to own. However, in, let's say, April 2000, so this is 2022, in April 2024, it was 34. So 18, that's 16 years to own. It has increased by 2 years. And remember my shopping trolley analogy? So it has actually increased by 16 years to own in 2 years. My question to you is, do you think the residents are feeling it? And then the next question is, how long will this affordability index have to tread upwards until internal demand from owner-occupiers completely evaporates? And then what happens then is that you see a snowball effect with external demand and investors. So the affordability index creates a friction point which changes behavior essentially. Coming down to the analysis of metrics, when you're analyzing something short-term, i.e. 1 to 4 years, you're looking at affordability and then supply and demand. And there are 3 elements that you analyze in supply and demand. You analyze the current values, you analyze the long-term trends and the short-term trends. Long-term trends and the short-term trends. Long-term trends and the short-term trends, and like that for every piece of information. And once you see the pieces of information constructed, in front of you, you then construct a story. Now, let's construct a story about Swan View. What do we see? We see a reduction in the stock on market, and by the way, trend equals direction. it takes a really long time for a trend in stock on market to revert back to flat. They would need to have, let's say current stock on market is 0.35%. It would need to be 5% for about a year, this overall trend that's declining to revert back to flat. We know that the stock on market will continue to drop in this area into the future. We have a 4-year long-term trend here. Let's allow for contingency and let's say 2.5 to 3. Let's not assume that it will continue doing so in the next 4 years. And now continue doing so in the next 4 years, probably not to this intensity, but it will continue. The trend will equal direction. Now let's say 3 years. We see a reducing stock on market. We also see a reducing stock inventory, both long-term and overall. Issue is we're seeing recently an increases in building approvals. And then I go back to the current values and I see there's 26 building approvals of 0.77%. The 0.77% is a neutral figure. And we have a dictionary on our pages where you can see the ranges and ascertain it that way. It's neutral, but my concern is the increase in trend, not only the recent and overall. So now if I'm trying to find a warm spot, I have to consider this and either mark it with an X and a tick or a complete X and assume that potentially in the next 2 years, these building approvals materialize into dwellings for sale. And if there's no sufficient demand to absorb these new dwellings, we're going to see price growth. So when you're comparing areas, you're comparing every single metric. And let's say I have 2 areas that have very similar stock on market and inventory, but this one has an increasing trend in building approvals. The other one hasn't. The other one is winning by that point. The other one is winning. So you have to go methodically one by one. There's a way to organize it. I can do a snapshot because I'm looking at this for a long time. So what do we see? We see an increase in supply. We see a potential of flux of new property into the future. See what I mean about the whole periods. Sitting at 7 years, the trend is overall increasing. Current trend, or 7 years, is below the overall trend, or the line that's been extrapolated from all the points. But you can see that whole periods, again, let's construct a story out of it. Because whole periods is not only a supply metric, and it tells us that every 7 years people offload property in that area, it's also a livability metric. And you'll actually understand why it's a livability metric when you have another suburb. I'll give you an example, Taylor Hills. It's not the same price point. But look at this change in sentiment. People don't like to live in this area, then they live in this area. Then they like to live in this area, and then they really like in this area, then they don't. Then they do, then they don't. Then they do, then they don't. You follow the curve. The curve is a sentiment. When you compare it to another suburb that has a fully straight curve, and it's increasing dramatically from year to year, you know that something is happening in that suburb where people want to stay more and more. Maybe they're giving out free candy. I don't know what's happening, but it's happening. You know what I mean? So every metric is a narrative constructed. Think about it. What does it say? What does it say? Tell me what it says. You know what I mean? And that you need to ask yourself that. In the same way, when you look at buyer search index and you see, let's say, buyer index increasing, that means, buyer search index, that means that people are searching more for property to buy in that area. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself is, how long does a search convert to a sale? And there's a large gap there. It doesn't even have to convert to a sale, which is why it's important. It's downgraded onto level 3. Most important is days on market. You need to also order the metrics in the order of importance and hierarchy. That relates to growth. So a lot of people go and say, oh yeah, buy and search index. People are searching a lot for property in that area to buy. Okay. I've searched for property a lot of times, but do you know how many times I bought in that area from search? Maybe once. You know what I mean? And if I'm going to search for that area, I'll search in a different way. So this is the significance of a metric. First, we have a metric and a story. Then we have to determine the significance of a metric. And that all needs to relate back to our brief. Anyway, going to demand side, what do we see? 37 days on market, neutral. If I look at the value, I would say it's not a hotspot. But then I look at the trend, the overall trend is reducing. However, the recent trend is a little bit increasing. You can see that it's actually all of the days on 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 out of 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's actually equal. It's actually right on the trend. What I'm trying to say is that most of the days on market in the last 6 months were above the trend line. It's actually very equal. So we see a nosedive, and this slope is very steep. We see a nosedive in days on market and recent trend sitting right on the trend line. Now let's look at vacancy rates. Vacancy rate is interesting, and I'll tell you what the story constructs at the end. And we've just got vacancy rates now. We see an overall nosedive reduction in vacancy rates, which is why we see a lot of past growth in rentals, 22%, more than growth in values. See? But by looking at the slope, look at the slope for vacancies. It is actually much steeper overall than days on market, stock on market, and everything else. Well, looking back at the growth rates, it makes sense. Median rents have increased by 22% in the last year. These ones have increased by 16. Anyway, not to waste time, we see an recent increase in vacancy rate. What do I see here? I see a market that has a reducing supply, a bit of a change in sentiment in hold periods. I see a market that has an increase in demand, but also increase in vacancies. What does that signal to you? A potentially market that's saturated with investors, potentially. I have to look at the renter to owner ratio. So I have to go back to renter to owner ratio. If it's high, it's 21, okay? It's just elimination, not really, it's still sitting at 21. But when you see a hot market with a hugely reducing supply, an increase in demand, and then a recent shot up in vacancy rates, it means that more and more people are buying, more and more investors are coming to the market. It could be investor saturated. Then you need to go back, look at the renter to owner ratio and see whether it confirms. If the renter to owner ratio was 45, I would say, yeah, boom, that's it. Yes, saturated by investors. Watch out, Matt. And then I would rank him. I would still not discount it, but I would rank it. I would take note of it. Now, what I've just analyzed is 1 to 4 years or 1 to 3 years. Then you go above the page, as well as this middle side of the page, and you analyze 3 to 6, 6 to 10. And there are ways to do that. But when you're analyzing suburb pages, everything needs to connect to each other. You need to analyze it from both short and long-term time frame. Why? Because you want to make money short-term, but you don't want to make money short-term at the expense of your long-term growth. And this is where some of the Perth areas become a problem. It's because they've seen such a substantial growth now, people made a lot of money, but what happens if you see a substantial decline? I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying there is a consideration when you analyze all of the metrics, it might happen, and in that instance, an asset turns into a liability, which stifles the growth of your portfolio, and you need to think about it. But if you're in that, let's say you're analyzing a suburb and you're saying, okay, long-term indicators are a bit iffy. I made a lot of money in the last 6 years, or 3 years, let's exit. So that can be your exit analysis as well. It doesn't have to be a buy and hold analysis. But anyway, recent pages have been upgraded. You also see the, high confidence at the top. Everywhere you hover over, you can see a definition. There's an RCS. There's even an AI explanation with respect to all of the metrics before, as well as the investment strategies that's suited for it, pros and cons, etc. Do I like this area? Has a good industry centralization, doesn't have exposure to bushfire and flood, has decent infrastructure spending. Its typical price curve is a problem, but it is for all of the Perth areas. DRC, look at this. It has spent in negative growth zone between 2015 and 2020, which is always a concern. And again, when I compare two areas, this is when actually this comes to light. When I see a GRC that's always hitting the red zone, red line, and never goes below, it does so for 3 decades. And I see this one, I have to go for the other. But overall, I do like this area, and I like it for short term. My concern for this area would be I have to watch out for vacancy rates. And if I was to purchase a home in this area, I would need to really look at asset selection and make sure that I purchase something that really stands out so it can be rented out. In doing so, let's look back at demand profile and see the 3 and 4 bedroom homes are mostly in demand. So if you're buying by either a 3-bedder or a 4-bedder, let's look at price disparity between a 3 and 4 bedroom. Let's see if there's some room there to generate equity. Let's see, look at this. Look at this. Okay, so this is a perfect example. I'm saying that this area, let's say, is not good long-term, but it's good short-term. Yeah? But what I see here, I see a 3-bedroom home for 581 and a 4-bedroom home for 717. So you have about 150K disparity there, give or take, between 3 and 4-bedroom homes. So let's say you want a value-add strategy when you're going to convert a carport into a bedroom, and we have some of our members doing that. you reevaluate it as a 4-bedroom house, not taking into account LVR. Don't get hung up on the fact that it's never going to be a perfect 150K. No, it will not. But if it's 80, you already made 80K. You already made 80K just from that initial value add. You add a bit of market momentum, which is happening in the short term, as we've seen. You don't care then about the 10-term mark. Sell at 8-term and get out. Then I don't really care about its typical price curve and about the GRC. Why? Because I made money from the value add, and the supply and demand dynamics are telling me that it's going to grow another 2 years, on average 10 to 15% growth. Beautiful. I'll sell off and get out. And you made 150, 180K. You know what I mean? So this is what I'm saying. It all depends what you can do with an area, you know, and at what time frame. But overall, I like it. Short term, long term, not so much. However, if you value add, I don't mind this area.
Beautiful. Maybe just a couple of things while you're there. One of the things that I think would be good for people to know, this is more so for the buyers agents who are dialed in today. If you scroll up, HTAG now has a feature where you can download a branded PDF. So generate PDF. If you have an account, you can brand it to your own business. I think this is a recent feature that you guys added, the branding, which is very cool.
And the whole platform is getting white labeled soon as well. So instead of saying HTAG here, you see your own thing. So if you know how to use the platform, you can do live sessions with your client and we'll show your own logo as well.
Beautiful. There you go.
Download this report. When it downloads, just because I'm online and I'm speaking, it will take some time. But when it does download, sorry, continue. Sorry, I'll just download it so I can show it to the public.
We actually had a question on the specific suburb from Anas, one of my team members, which is a very good question over here. So he said, isn't whole period also a result of sharp price growth in a short time? So people want to take profits in hopes that they don't lose money when the market reverses. What are your thoughts on that question there?
Hold on. Which area was I looking at? So, sorry, can you just say that again? I heard it, but just to make sure that I give a complete, isn't whole periods an indication that people are selling off just because they've made money?
Yeah, so like I think with this one, there's a short-term drop in the whole periods over the last 1 year or so. And he's asking that, isn't that just people trying to cash out from the fact that the areas had such positive
I'll
growth?
tell you a bit of an anecdote, which a buyer's agent told me. I completely agree with it, but she really framed it well for me. She said, Matt, the best investment property is that one which will be bought by an owner-occupier. Okay? So now let me just go back to this question. If people are selling off because they've made money, by the way, if they're going to Bali, the money that they've made will make sense. But if they're staying in Australia, the money that they've made is not going to get them far. You don't see, well, you saw disparity between states, but that extra 20% that they made is not going to make them rich. So my question is, why are they selling off? Are there owner-occupiers who are selling off, who are cashing in to go somewhere else? And then the question is where? If it's Bali, it makes sense. But if it's Australia, but see how we're going into the hypothetical again. But if it's investors, my question is, then I'm thinking, okay, is this area primarily driven by investors and their need to make money and sell off? Which is why you see the instability in the typical price, as well as the instability in the GRC. And what I want from an investment, from a long-term compounded growth, and I think Einstein, whoever said it, compounded growth is the eighth wonder of the world. I want above average growth for long periods of time. And if people are selling out, again, game of probability, game of ranking, if I'm bearing two areas, they're all equal on everything else. While one has a whole period of 4, another has a 12, I know which decision I'm making. I'm eliminating any form of emotion out of it. Now, the question you asked is why? Well, I don't know why. It could be there. It's dominated by investors. Maybe that's a why. Maybe it's not a positive why that you're saying. Maybe it's a negative why that's dominated by investors. But if it's a positive why they're cashing out and going, my question is where? Because that 25% that they made is not really going to buy a mansion anywhere else unless they really downsize. They're still living in Australia. So the issue about devaluing of our currency is the fact that you optically see that you're making money in Australia, but everything is going up. And even the money that you make, even if you sell off, you sell off even if you, and you sell off and you're only better off if you go into a completely different economy, ran by completely different dynamics, where that bag of cash actually means something.
So it sounds like the lesson there is move to Bali. I think
Well, you know what I mean? Like my brother's done that. My brother sold his house and went to Serbia, and there it makes sense. He made 100% returns on a house that he bought for 250. He sold off, but for 500, what is he going to do with his 500 when he sells off? And he made 100%, by the way. What is he going to do with 500 here in Australia? What are you going to do? What? Buy another mortgage that's bigger, try to live above your means and actually get yourself into more debt, or go somewhere. Where can you buy a house in? Well, maybe his choice should have been Broken Hill. You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do?
Beautiful. Okay.
So in any case, the answer is sometimes I don't care why. Okay, I care what. And the what becomes important when you're superimposing areas as opposed to looking at them in an isolated manner. That's one thing that has to change in this industry. Looking at things in an isolated manner is wrong. And this graph makes much more sense when you look at three next to it under the same price point.
I think that's really important. I really like that point. It's kind of like, yes, this suburb might have like some positives to it, but if you have a client that's open to any area, why not look at an area that has all of the same positive metrics like vacancy trending down, so on and so forth, but has better hold periods and better affordability as well, right? And then if there's suburbs that have that, then it's like, okay, that's a better area to invest in. Sometimes you might get clients again, or you yourself. I'm saying clients because again, I'm assuming a lot of people here are BAs, but there are a decent amount of people who aren't BAs that are listening in. When you're buying for yourself, it's just that comparison becomes important. It's not just individual analysis, especially as borderless investing is becoming like a lot more popular, right? That's why we do what we do. Back in the day, people, they only wanted to purchase 5 to 6 suburbs away. Now every suburb is an option.
What you said is extremely important, and for buyers agents more. Why? Because they can explain to their client the why. So these days, and you can attest to this, I haven't asked you this question before, but you tell me what you think. So more and more we see people, because they see something online, coming to you or to other buyers agents saying, hey, Arshad, I want you to buy here for me. And if you can't explain why, and the thing is though, you as a buyer's agent, you don't want to lose a client. You're building a business, you want revenue, you want cash flow, but you want to remain ethical. So you're provided with a conundrum, essentially. And the best way to sort that conundrum is to explain. And you say, yes, Mr. Buyer, this is the area that you want me to buy in. Here it is. Not just provide a report, but see how I've explained the metrics and I've linked them. And I said, this is your area. This is the one that I want you to invest in. And this is why. I'm telling you, 99% of people will go, okay, no worries, whatever you say, Mr. Buyer's agent. The issue is people don't know how to explain.
No, I agree. And I think like even just today, watching you in action explaining has hopefully improved the way that the people listening, definitely myself, the way we're going to approach explaining, right? Like oftentimes it's just like, yeah, look, demand is good, supply is down, let's go, right? Whereas
can I listen, I know we're going to digress, but I just want to show people the complexity. Okay, so if you don't mind, Arshad, do you
I don't mind, please go.
Okay, so this is 30
9:30. Maybe if you could go for like 3-4 minutes or 5 minutes, and then we'll maybe jump back to the areas for try to tie it off.
So the complexity of comparing suburbs. So for example, you have a short list, you have the brief filtering criteria which you spoke about, and then you have a weighted score. What is a weighted score? Not every metric has the same weighting in response to your brief. And as you are assigning, let's say if you want higher yield, and let's say your weighting is between 1 and 10, and 10 being the most important, 1 being the least in order to satisfy the yield, you need to, because what you and I were looking at the moment, we're looking at each metric in the same way. We're assigning the same weightings. We're sort of not thinking about the brief. If you want to do real comparison, You have to assign weightings to all of the metrics and then provide an explanation as to why you've given a certain weightings. And then it gives you a ranking score. Let's say price has a weighting of 6.5. You rank all of the suburbs. Then you have formulas linked times this weighting, the actual rank of the suburb. When I say the rank, let's say you had two suburbs, one that has a whole period of 11 and one that has a whole period of 7. You would rank one with 11 with the number 2 being the higher, and then the one that had 7 with the number 1. But then you still need to create a weighting for whole period on the base of your brief, which is going to times rank, then produce an overall score. Like ranking suburbs, look at this spreadsheet, ranking suburbs, and you go away to score. Ranking suburbs is a very, very extensive process and complex process, which if you set up once, is very easy. Once you go through this once, and if your client, other buyer's agent, or social media guru asks you about what do you think about the suburb, mate, you're going to bombard them with so much information, they're gonna wish they never asked you. So this is only 30% of the story. Again, everything relates back to the narrative you construct, the weightings you assign to the metrics, and the brief you develop. See the link? The link must be maintained. When you maintain the link, the final piece of the puzzle is asset selection. And this is your skill more there than me to talk about that. But if you maintain this coherent link, you understand why, and your anxiety reduces to 0 of picking the wrong choice. And then you're never going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to go to a buyer's agent and say, but what do you think about, Gordon Whale in Cairns? So going back to what's the next one? So you got 850 is the next one.
Matt, just before you get onto that, I just want to quickly, can I screen share for a second? I just want to take care of just make a couple of announcements just on some upcoming stuff, and then we can jump back to this for the remaining 20 minutes or so. I'll screen share for a second. Cool. So guys, am I screening the right screen? So just quickly want to interject here just because a couple of people have to head off soon. Firstly, we do have 4 upcoming events across the next 8 weeks, one for each of the states, and we'll most likely do another one on Tasmania / ACT, maybe even Northern Territories. We might do those 3 as one event. That's something we'll figure out after these events are done. So don't forget to register for these events as well. You'll all be emailed these links to sign up. And then other than that, don't forget that we have a giveaway. So the giveaway for the first prize and second prize will be announced at the end of all of the events. Whereas the third prize, which is there'll be multiple giveaways that will be after each event. We'll touch a base with the winners of these giveaways, and if you want to avail them, you can just let us know and we'll take you through that process. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly make that announcement, and now we can jump back into it, Matt, just before everyone drops off. Don't want to leave that for the end, and most people miss it.
Yeah, no worries. I just want to see another suburb that I like. So it will be Greater Dan. What do we say? 650. So we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All seem okay because they got the risk address. Let's look at this one in particular. I honestly haven't pre-seen these suburbs because I'm just
you're no longer screen sharing.
Oh yeah, sorry. Screen share. So let's say this one, can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, this one seems to be a good suburb. And I can send the PDF reports. Industry, it's not too bad. Again, exposure to negative environmental effects is not bad. We have high infrastructure spending. Typical price curve is less volatile than the previous one. Again, it's a higher price point, so we see less volatility. But we also, this curve just looks better to me overall. Growth rate cycle very similar. You can see that in WA areas, usually states follow the same cycles, give or take. we see, you know, 2024, it's still projected to grow at around 19%. So still got room to move. By the way, this is not a projection to be taken into consideration as a most important thing. The most important thing is supply and demand, but we'll get to that. The higher IRSAD score, and for higher price points, you always need higher socioeconomics, because it's very hard to find a suburb that comes to $900 or $1 million in value and has very bad or disadvantageous socioeconomics. Now, socioeconomics play less of a role for long-term growth for price points of 500K and below, but they do in this instance, and I think we're looking at between 650 and 850 from memory. So socioeconomics is good. Renter-to-owner ratio is 20. Why is renter-to-owner ratio important, for example? Again, let's construct a narrative. When macroeconomic conditions change, that it becomes very hard for investors to hold on to their assets, and when rents do not increase at the pace of mortgages, some people start selling off. So this renter-to-owner ratio, if it's high, can actually turn into supply. And if the demand doesn't absorb the supply, you can see dampened price growth. So it's another thing to consider. But again, it needs to be a narrative and you need to understand it. You know, we have a projection here, which I'm not going to talk about that. That's essentially, you know, the cone. It's projecting actually growth. It's usually a band between -1 or 2 to 15. In this instance, it's +3 to +11. It's sitting, look at this arshad, for example. The previous area we looked at, which was this one here, a 649K typical price. And look at its affordability index. It was sitting at 35. This area here, which is much more expensive, about 100K more, not much more, sitting at the same affordability index, or maybe a bit less. It's sitting at 34, 1 year less, which means that people have more purchasing power in this residence, even though the prices of homes are higher. Do you know what I mean? So this is how you start comparing and start realizing, you know, what the value for the index actually means, and what you can do in one area as opposed to another. In this instance, for example, four bedroom dominates, I think, in the other one as well. Looking at supply and demand, we have a semi-reducing stock on market overall, but recent one is taking a nosedive. The same for inventory, although inventory overall is reducing more. Building approvals are increasing, however, not as much as in this one here, for example, because this one here, there was building approvals every month. You rarely see a missed building approval month like this one here. In this one, it's much more sporadic. Yes, the curve is steeper and there's more increases here. Let's see how many building approvals, 31. The other one is 22. But overall, it's more sporadic, however, not dramatically. So the concern, again, is future supply. You know, hold periods are sitting at, what, 29? And look at these two graphs, for example. This one, look at the actual steepness of the curve. This one is increasing, and this one is increasing much more. Yes, there's been a bit of a change here at the back end for whatever reason, but it was tracking much, more predictable for a longer period of time. Plus, it's sitting at a higher 0.29 years. Again, usually higher hold periods associated with higher values. What do we have for demand? We have sitting at 23 days. Overall demand dropping is what is recent. Again, hotspot territory, both. In this instance, we have a better vacancy rate because recent vacancy rate is only increasing by a small amount, and the overall trend is dropping as per the other one. We have rent search index increasing, which means that this increase could actually revert back and drop a little further, which would reinforce the overall downward trend and actually reinforce the increase in the rents. 7% at the moment. Clearance rates are on lookout. Let's look at the buy index. Buy index has also been increasing while the other one is remaining flat. Overall, I like this area better, for example, than the previous one, even though it's a higher price point. And if I put it on pen to paper, I would choose one over the other one, both long-term and short-term. Now, let's look at the disparity, room disparity. What do we have? We don't have such a room disparity. Okay, this is a perfect example. So the other one is better if I'm going to take advantage of the room disparity and add a bedroom and have circa between 50 to 80K equity sitting there on the sidelines. In this instance, I can't take advantage of it, so I have to just rely on market momentum. So in this instance, again, the strategy, the first one wins. If I look at purely the metrics and momentum, this one would win. See how it changes? See how a hotspot for me is not a hotspot for you? It all depends on the brief. And I guess finally, if I want to look at the last one, it will be 800K and above, would you say? Greater than, let's say, 850. We have two. Let's look ranking by the RCS. They're very close. Woodwell is the first one.
Maybe let's actually compare the two. Let's go through so let's say a client came and they were like they wanted to invest in Perth on the higher budget, and then you picked these two suburbs for them, and they were like, "Oh, I want you to just tell me which one is preferable." So let's say that was the activity. How would you compare the two and then choose one over the other? I mean, in most cases, you'll probably end up
So
keeping.
first, I'll do a spreadsheet like this, and I have to make sure that I compare on the base of the brief, and I look at every metric and I look at every trend and assign value and assign, as I said before, and assign these weightings to metrics in relation to the brief. Okay. So I will do that. I do an extensive comparison. But if I just had to do it quickly and look at the suburb pages, and by the way, all of this is taught in our mastermind, as you know. So if I had to look at the suburb pages quickly, these are the things that I look at. I don't look at the RCS first. A lot of people come to the RCS first. We need to learn how to deconstruct the RCS. We need to learn how to interpret trends ourselves. So the first thing that I do, industry centralization is better in this one. No, sorry. Industry centralization is better in Edgewater. Bushfire and flood, nothing really. 700 infrastructure spending in Edgewater. In this one, 182. So Edgewater is winning up to now. Let's look at the curve. Man, there was no growth at all for a long period of time. Let's look at Edgewater's curve. I would say that Edgewater's curve is a little bit better. Let's look at the disparity. So this one has had in the last year 20%, in the last three nearly 50, in the last 5 76. I want in this instance I want to see one which has had less growth. So it would be what's it called? Woodwell. So Edgewater is better, and then Woodwell is a little bit better because it has seen less growth. And I'm assuming that if its supply and demand dynamics are still great, it has seen a bit of less growth, which means that there's more steam. Look at its typical price, and remember what I told you about volumes. We see a reduction in volumes in the area, but an increase in price. So you see the histogram at the back. There's a reduction in volumes, but an increase in price. This is like FOMO or some other sort of non-economic sound behavior. While in Edgewater, well, you sort of see not as sharp, but you do see an increase, which is, I guess, reminiscent of WA.
So
further down, let's look at the GRC.
Sorry, Matt, with that one, could it just be the fact that hold periods are becoming longer in the area? So there's just not as much sales volume available. Is it like it could be
it's an interesting observation. I have to think about it because overall sales volumes remain close to each other for 3 decades.
Yeah.
But there's a recent drop.
Yeah.
They're sort of sporadic. There's a pattern. Hold periods, on the other hand, they've increased between 2011 from 6 to 9. So we're talking about 3 years more. We're not talking about 20 years difference. I don't think a single thing can. For example, I'll give you an example. In 2016, you had 7.96 hold periods, which is very close to 2021, 7.8. Yeah. They were the same. Now let's look at the price change. In 2000, sorry, what was it? It was 2016 and 2021. So in 2016, where is it? 2014, 2016. Yeah, look at this sale volume. And look at price decline. And look at 2021. So the sale volume is actually a bit less, while the price growth was more. It's not hold periods related, but it's a good observation. You know what I mean? So the hold periods were actually the same in these two instances, but what we see is you see inverse behavior when it comes to the price. We see, sorry, in 2016, we see price starting to decline and then sales being at this topper end. In 2021, we see an increase between 2019 and 2021, while the whole sales were a bit lower and hold periods are the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. I'm wrapping my.
Sorry. So hold periods were the same for both time frames. They were the same value, but the sales and price growth was different. Essentially, is what I'm saying.
And so what can we attribute that to then? We just have to compare the other data points at those 2 points.
You have to just superimpose many other data points. I just want to see in this instance relationship between sales and price growth, and if I can elicit a pattern. In this instance, usually the higher the sales, the more growth. You know what I mean? So usually when people sell, they sell at a higher value, especially if the hold periods are increasing. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if there's less and less sales and price is growing, that means that, you know, it's a seller's market. They're asking more for it essentially at a point of sale. I'm assuming that's one scenario interpretation. It could be more, but essentially, you know, sales is a point where supply meets demand. You know, usually when you have less supply and more demand, price grows, which is what has actually initiated this price growth. But you also see it substantiated by a volume of sales because property needs to exchange hands for that growth to actually materialize. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, beautiful. So coming back to the original question of comparison of
what would I choose? Okay, yeah. What would I choose? Edgewater is edging above. Let's look at its supply and demand. So stock on market, it's all green, hold periods, overall reduction, recent reduction, overall reduction, recent increase. There's no building approval, sitting at 9, long term, that's good. Look at this, man, 49 days of market. Look at the days of market here. It started increasing a little. Overall trend is dropping. Vacancy rate is reducing. Let's look at this one here. What do we see? We see very similar stock on market and inventory. We see very similar building approvals. These hold periods are better. Okay, look at the days of market. Now, which one would I choose? Because Perth is at the end of the cycle, I would choose Edgewater. But if Perth was at the beginning of its cycle, I would use this one because it's still not a hot market in the sense that the days of market is flat. When the days of market is reducing dramatically, like in this instance, it becomes very hard to source real estate. You usually overpay for real estate. So I would use the flat one as a warm spot analogy. However, the issue is that I know that Perth has gone past its curve, so I'm worried that these days of market will continue to go up and will increase the curve more and more upwards. So my choice goes to this one quickly. Okay. Edgewater over Woodvale.
Okay, beautiful. That's hopefully that's some good insight for those listening at home. I think we're getting pretty close to the end of the session, so we're just before jumping in Q&As. Do you want to just share the list of suburbs that you had there, just so people can see? I know, like, we only were able to look at 2 to 3 of them, but I'm sure a lot of people would want to just know, like, what all the suburbs you got through.
I deleted that screen, so what I'll do, I'll reconstruct it again. So I'll go city. Actually, I have your save state here.
There we go.
Why is it just showing that?
I think
because it's suburbs. Yeah, okay. Yeah, here you go. That's the short list. Can I dump it in? Can I just copy and paste it and like do a snip, for example?
Yeah. So what we'll do in the email that we send out, we'll send out this snip. And one thing so for all of you attending over here, if you're part of HTAG already, we'd highly recommend jump in the Telegram communities, do the analysis on the suburbs shared, as well as other suburbs that you're interested in, and share your analysis. Matt will give feedback, I'll give feedback, and honestly, everyone in the community will give feedback. It's a really active community. If you're not already part of the HTAG community, would highly recommend joining. Keep an eye out for the giveaways. The team will possibly be in touch with you over the next couple of days. And even if you don't win the giveaway, if you do win the giveaway, definitely join HTAG. Because one thing that you're not seeing here is that HTAG, it's more than just a software. It's a really good community where you can share your insights and get a lot of feedback, right? I don't know how he has the time in the day to like get back to everyone and give them really good feedback. I think there must be 3 to 4 different Matts out there. And every meeting we have a different one that we talk to. But even when Matt can't, there's other BAs, there's sophisticated investors there who give really, really good feedback. Even if it's something as simple as, one, you're unsure about an area and you get that validation, it can be really helpful, right? That can be worth like more than like $20,000-$30,000 getting that additional confidence in an area. So definitely keep an eye out over the next couple of days if we get in touch with you around the giveaway, and we'll take it from there.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. As I said, it's more aiming on the actual development of skill set as opposed to just providing a numbers on a page. And also it's a community. As you know, recently we had a trip to Melbourne, met with our community. It was actually phenomenal. I'm really sorry you couldn't attend. So yeah, I mean, the aim of the mastermind and everything else is to really teach people and provide, there's much more under the hood here. We don't have enough time, but to provide people with enough tools to actually know how to analyze areas and just for buyers agents, locking their clients quickly, and for everyday investors actually know that they're making the right decision. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it is all about the community. And thank you, Arshad, for saying that.
Beautiful. Okay, I think we're going to jump into Q&A now. In the chat, I'm just gonna share the tickets for all the upcoming events. Please make sure to register if you haven't already registered. It just makes it easier for us to manage things like webinar registration, webinar licensing, so on and so forth. So there are the upcoming ones. Just click register, good to go from there. Let's jump into a few of the questions that we had. I'm just scrolling up. So
No hard questions, please.
yeah. Okay, this is an easy one, a product one. Can you compare suburbs easily using HTAG, i.e. superimpose graphs of different suburbs onto each other? Is that a feature that exists currently, Matt?
No, you have to open up the separate pages. Oh, sorry. Yes, because there is Excel in the services that you can print out, and all of the metrics are there in the Excel. So you can actually do it in the Excel. On the platform now, you would have to open up separate pages and actually compare. But if you want to have it all next to each other, it's in the Excel. And the thing is, though, because at the end, the final comparison of the ranking has to happen in the Excel, so you can just transfer it there and do it that way, because the comparison happens essentially here, But when it comes to the platform itself, I mean, you can do a share window thing and open up different windows and stuff, but you can't at the moment. Let's say you want to search here and get a GRC of another area right next to it, and this is because of usability and the constructing of the narrative. So you need to start at this layer here and construct a narrative that relates to your brief, and then you get, a short list of suburbs. Then you open up all of the suburb pages and look at them. What you want to see is, I guess, if you open up 7 windows, you want to see all 7 next to each other. Even if you did, you'll get confused. But if you really want to look at the metrics, you can just download the Excel form. So the Excel actually has all of the suburbs, all of the metrics, all of the numbers, because some people prefer to work in Excel. I just work on the platform, by the way. I don't know if that answered.
No, that answers perfectly. So long story short, can't superimpose on the platform, but you can just compare page to page, but you can download all the different suburbs as a as a as a
Excel.
as an Excel spreadsheet, and then you can add multiple filterings on it, right? You can add like sort by this, and then you can, if for those of us who are good with Excel, you can add different hierarchies, you can create graphs comparing stuff, and there's quite a few cool stuff that you can do for
And
your.
the RCS is also in Excel. So all of these scores as well are in Excel, represented as bars also. So you can also see the bars. And Excel actually has much more information than you see here. Like, let's say if we here have 50, Excel has 80, Excel also has all of the intel underneath data that we actually construct. So in Excel, for example, EDI is separated into three different metrics, which will be industry centralization, dominance of mining and agriculture, and bushfire, and something else,
Yeah, beautiful. I think like one thing, probably not for the short term, but maybe over the next few weeks is providing we can do like an educational piece for the users on how to effectively you analyze through Excel as well. Let's finish off these sessions and then that we can do that.
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. We have over here is uh can we still see heat map having typical price of all surrounding suburbs? Uh, I don't
Yeah.
know.
So you're talking about this heat map here. So let's say you click on it, his Isaac, it's actually hyperlinked. You can also filter the heat map by the RCS, whether it's overall, and RCS contains 80 metrics, but you can also go, let's say, to New South Wales. It will take to load because, as I said, it's Zoom. You can go to New South Wales and then you can switch from suburbs to councils if you wish so. And then you click on what's called the actual suburb. It will give you like a snapshot information, and it's actually hyperlinked, so you can actually go and you can take it to the suburb. It's loading because I'm actually recording now, so but yeah, it's gonna take some time. I don't know why.
That's fine.
Yeah, so here, like for example, let's say suburbs. So it gives you a bit of information. Then you can go to Livingston. You can open up, and you can do the same for the suburbs themselves or Sydney or whatever you choose. Or you can type in and search either council. We're also working on new additions for the map as well, adding confidence and all of that. But confidence is already added in the RCS course, so you can filter by that. I usually use the map by determining, growth clusters and to work in that way.
Beautiful. I think that's pretty much it in terms of, okay, here we go. Can we assign a couple more? Can we assign strength to the price trend based of sales volume?
Can we assign strength?
To the price trend based off sales volume. I don't know if I fully understand that.
Yeah, I know what he's trying to. Well, it's an optical test, I guess. So what you're saying is a correlation between sales volume and price, but you can actually see it. Like you can see the histogram of sales at the back.
And then Vin has other recording tutorial how to use the platform. I believe there's a few like once you sign up.
So, so a big part of the platform is the mastermind community. Okay, so the answer is yes. The answer is yes. But what we've done is we've actually created a community where everyone bounces ideas of each other on how to shortlist, because it's not only the platform, how to use it. Like there's also support. Like you open up support. If we're talking about the platform only, there's a data dictionary. There's an educational hub. For example, data dictionary. To give you an example, like if you go in there, every metric is explained. Not only that, every metric is hyperlinked. So there are academic articles written on what each metric constitutes, how we've come to that metric, etc. So you actually know more. There's also an extensive onboarding. So there's a gamification part of the onboarding. So when you onboard, the gamification part takes you on a journey where it tells you where things are. And it's essentially 5 or 6 or 7 steps. Arshad, I forgot, you've done it recently. How much was it? 5 or 6 or 7 steps. It takes you to tell you, for example, here on the homepage, you need to expand to expert, you need to shift to suburbs, this is the strategy filter, this is cities, this is that, blah, blah, blah. It also takes you to the suburb page. But then, as I said, the most important bit, I do regular educational videos in my mastermind community about different price points, different strategies, different timeframes. And for example, we go through these ranking spreadsheets and the weighting scores. Like it's really educational and intense. And let's say there's 2 days worth of videos in there that provide you the depth of, a year's worth of course. So to answer your question, it's like, yes, there's, constant help about you using the platform and the onboarding, but the key is the analysis and deep diving and all of that that's provided in the community.
Beautiful. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. quite a few thank yous as well. Thanks again.
And by the way, thanks a lot everyone for staying, man. Like really, I really appreciate it for coming on. Yeah, sorry, I just had to squeeze that in. Sorry, I cut you off, Arshad.
No, no, beautiful. And I think everyone's really thankful to you and the analysis that you provided us. I've just been here, kind of structuring things, looking good. No, no. Cool. All right, everyone. We'll hopefully see you in the next session. I'm actually really excited for the Queensland and Vic session. So those are the two upcoming next. I think I'm most excited for those two.
Me
So
too.
like Queensland, obviously there's Brisbane, but then there's Cairns and there's Townsville and there's Mackay and there's so many moving markets. Victoria's kind of been the one that everyone's been roasting a bit, but like now a lot of people are starting to be like, hey, maybe it's time. Like numbers are looking different. So I'm very keen for those next two sessions. Uh, We'll send you all a follow-up email. We'll keep you posted on giveaways. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out directly to me on how we can better conduct these sessions because we do have 4 more webinars, maybe even a 6th one coming up on the other states, the forgotten states, Tasmania, ACT, NT, maybe even might do what are those little holiday islands over there? No, definitely not. Yeah, so we'll have that stuff coming up. Definitely reach out to us on any feedback, and if these events are something you guys like, we'll make them an annual thing that we do to keep people updated on the areas. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone, and see you all in 2 weeks, hopefully.
Thanks a
Thanks.
lot, everyone. Thank you very much. Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.